Hey friends, welcome back to my channel, and for those of you with me for the first time, my name is Melissa Reed and I'm a mixed media artist. So you see today I have in front of me a completed piece of art and some artificial flowers there. This is the video that everyone has been asking for where I show you some of my most frequently used collage paper techniques. So this is going to be a two-parter, so I'm going to do 4 or 5 techniques today and then next week another one. So you can see my flowers there. I have some very paint covered ones. I have some very clean ones. It doesn't matter. They print just the same with paint on them, but you can certainly clean yours off after each use. So I have my little 6x6 gel plate there, and I have some Liquitex Basics Mars Black paint. That's what I'm going to do this first technique in, and what we're doing is printing some flowers, which I showed you in that completed piece there. I'm putting some of the paint down on my gel plate and I'm going to get it spread out there. Incidentally, all of the finished pieces that I show you today, I'm going to have a link to the videos where I made those in the description if you're interested. Also, there will be links to all of the items that I use in these videos. So for the flowers, I'm just spreading my paint down on the plate there. I do leave it slightly thicker than I would for like a transfer. And I'm just using a pickup sheet there. I like to actually make the little hole where the stem goes in because I find that I can press it down a little better there to get more coverage on the petals. You see me lifting it up. I'm just looking to see how much paint was picked up. When I'm happy with the amount, I'm going to take it off there. Of course, you can always go in and clean up anything around there with a damp paper towel if you want. But for today's purposes, I'm going to just go with it. I let that paint dry for a minute or two, and I'm going in with some Liquitex matte gel medium. I used way too much matte medium, as you can see there, and I'm trying to wipe it off a little bit. But I'm laying that down, and I'm going to go in just with a piece of my acid-free tissue paper and pick up that print. You'll see where I lay that down slightly there, and if you run your finger across the top before you smooth the paper down, it tends to add less wrinkles. I definitely let that dry for a little while, maybe 2 minutes for the medium to dry, and then there is your flower print. And there are your flowers, and then I just tear or cut those out, and because I used the tissue paper and the matte medium, they're very translucent. You can barely see the tissue in the back, and that's how I do my flower technique. You will see this in a lot of my different pieces, and it's one of my favorites. Okay, you may remember this piece if you've been with me for a while. Again, I'll have a link to the description for that video as well. This is just my striped paper. Now, there is absolutely nothing magical about this striped paper. It is super simple to do, but because I do use it in a lot of my videos, I thought I would add it in for this one. I love the black and white stripes, and there are so many different ways to do it, but I'm going to show you a couple today that are the easiest. I have some strips of Duralar there, which is just a synthetic paper. It's just like thin strips of plastic. You can use anything that you want for this. You can use like cut up magazine pages if you want as well. Be a little more careful with those because this plastic will adhere to your gel plate really well. And if you're using a paper, it often doesn't, and you'll have issues with it lifting up when you lay it down. So here's the first method that I'm using here, which is just spreading some ink right there on my 6x6 gel plate again. I'm sorry, not ink. I always say ink. This is actually your Liquitex Basics Mars Black again, which is what I'm going to use for a lot of these techniques here. Laying that down on my plate, and then I'm going to lay all of those little strips of the Duralar on there until the whole plate is completely full. Now you'll want to work fairly quickly here because, as you know, acrylic paint dries very fast. I'm grabbing a pickup sheet, which I'm just using a regular sheet of copy paper here, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up that paint that is visible through those. So you can use this sheet as some collage paper if you want. I typically like to use tissue paper. When you pull those up, you'll get a much lighter print off of that because a lot of the paint stuck to what was essentially a mask on your plate there. I'm laying down some more of the Liquitex matte gel medium and my tissue paper. I'll let that dry really well, and I'll show you in a second what we've got. So this is kind of a twofer. You got that first copy paper sheet with the very black and white contrast. And then with the tissue on the second print here, it's almost like a ghost print. You're getting a much lighter set of stripes. So you could use those two for different things. So for this, I'm going to use those Duralar strips one more time, and I'm going to just lay those down completely on the plate to start with. This time I'm going to apply the paint directly over top of those. Now this is where if you were using paper, it could get a little tricky because that might start to lift onto your brayer. So it's possible, but you have to be extra careful. This way that Duralar really seals itself to the plate. And while that's still wet, we lift those up and get our tissue paper ready, lay it down, and we're going to pull our print this way. Now, of course, you'll let this dry for a minute or two, just like you normally would with any kind of print. And when you lift it up, you've got very nice contrasting black stripes on a very transparent piece of tissue paper. So I know this is a little basic, but here are the 3 different kinds of stripes that we made. So in this next one, here's another finished piece. You can see I used the flower technique in this piece, but I also have some lettering in there. And this is what I refer to as my Ransom note style lettering. This appears in a lot of my pieces as well, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So you might see that I have some National Geographic magazines sitting there next to me. Any magazine will work. And this is nothing earth-shattering either, but I've never seen anybody else really do this. I'm sure people have because it's pretty obvious to do, but I hadn't seen it and I started using this in my work and I really like the way it turns out. So I have some pages marked there with some text that I like. Now, when I'm doing this, what I'm looking for is different sizes and styles of font, because if you think about like the Ransom notes that you've seen in movies and things like that, it's all very different because it's being cut out of different magazines. And so I don't want it to all be the same. So I wouldn't take like that block of text that I just cut out there. I wouldn't take all of the letters just from that because it's going to be too similar. So this one here is a little larger and the font is a little bit different. So I'm basically just looking for variety there. And I'm just cutting out a few of these text blocks so that I can cut my individual letters out. Now you'll want to have a word or phrase or something in mind that you're going to use this for. I actually ended up coming up with that after I had cut out the text blocks. And now I'm just going in and cutting out my letters. Be very careful when you're doing this. You want to get the entire letter in there. And I like to cut the square that the letter is in. I like to cut those to different sizes as well. And you want those to be big enough that there is going to be some paper around the actual letter if possible. Now, some of them, the way the font was, there weren't really large spaces between the letters. So, you work with what you have. And the phrase that I'm going with here is tell me. So I'm cutting out all of my letters there. Now, I would recommend, and I didn't do that this time and I got lucky, I would recommend cutting out several of each letter because sometimes if everything isn't exactly perfect, they don't print. So save yourself some hassle and get that all done ahead of time. I'm going to be using my Liquitex Mars Black paint again and spreading some of that down on my gel plate. Speed is key here. I recommend doing no more than 4 letters at a time to get everything to print properly. I've tried doing more and some of them don't turn out. So I'm using my pickup sheet here. I'm using a piece of tissue paper to pick that up. You don't want that laying down there very long because you're just doing an image transfer and you know that you only lay that down for a moment or two and 1 or 2 quick rubs and then you pull up your pickup sheet. I'm just taking advantage of the space that's still on that board to print the rest of my letters there while I don't disrupt what I have printed on the top. So I'm going to lay those last 2 letters down and repeat the process. And when I peel those up, you can see that I got good solid prints of those letters. And all I'm going to do now is simply go in with my matte medium and pick those up as I would any other print. So I'm laying down my tissue there. I do edit out my drying process here because nobody wants to watch paint dry, so I assure you that this is fully dry before I pick it up, which took a couple of minutes. I used actually a hair dryer on low, so it went even faster. But there are my letters. You can see I got nice clear prints with a little bit of a rectangle around, because where that physical piece of paper was, it left a mark around there, which is desirable, and I want that. So when I cut those out, I'm making sure to cut around them so that that outline of those rectangles is still visible. And that'll be visible when I glue those down. Otherwise, you're just going to have the letters, which would also be fine, but I think adding that element to it just adds a little bit more to it actually looking like that Ransom Note style. So I've got a piece of started work here that is on a small canvas, and I was looking for some kind of substrate to glue these down to, and this was something I started a while back and never got anywhere with, although I think I'm going to pursue this in a couple of weeks as a video, so be on the lookout for that. What I'm going to do is decide on my placement there, add a little bit of my matte medium down, and then just simply glue these letters down. I find it easiest with small things that I'm trying to glue down to kind of just put it on the brush first, as you can see me doing there. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but that way my fingers are not getting in all of the medium and it's getting everywhere, but I didn't do a great job of that and I literally had it all over my hands at this point. But we're just going in there and getting everything good and glued down. There's kind of a heavy dark chunk on the top of that letter E that printed that I didn't want there, so I just trimmed that off there, and we are left with our Ransom Note style lettering. I like the way it looks. I think it's very cool, and it's something I use in a lot of my work. Okay, so in front of me now I have that skull piece with some squares in the background. I'm going to show you how I made those square prints. Now you might have noticed when I picked up in the last video my pickup sheets for the Ransom Note lettering, it left these kind of square marks. Well, I had those laying around one day and really kind of liked the way that they looked. So I wanted to use them in this piece that I have in front of me right now, but I had to go in and actually make them. So instead of printing the letters to get those made, what I actually did was just cut out a bunch of strips of paper and then cut those into rectangles and squares, lay them on my plate and print. And I'm going to show you right now. I apologize for the light in this video. I typically record very, very early in the morning, even when it's still dark out, and I did this right in the middle of the afternoon, and there's just this beam of light that I didn't notice until after I had recorded this, so we'll just bear with it for this. Now I am using, again, magazine paper here, and I specifically wanted to do that because, like I had said in the stripe segment, magazine paper or thick plastic is gonna be best for something like this. If you were just to use a sheet of copy paper, it's not impossible, but those squares are going to want to lift up when you roll your roller across it way more than if you use a paper that has a little bit of thickness and plasticity to it. I'm just setting a sheet of paper over the top of that just so I can roll my brayer over it a couple times just to make sure that those squares are good and stuck down there, although they probably were just with the pressure of my hand, but I wanted to make doubly sure that they weren't going to lift up when I added the paint, which is what I'm going to do here in just a moment. And again, I'm just going in with the Liquitex Mars Black and rolling that on there in a decent layer. I'm going to roll off a little bit, and I do end up hitting this with the hair dryer on cool just for a minute or two to speed up the drying process. I do that on just about everything I do in the gel plate because I'm impatient and it speeds things up immensely. So you can see here everything has dried and I am now peeling off all of those little squares. And what I'm left with is that pattern right there. It's dry. I'm going to lay down my matte medium with my brayer, and once that's on there, I will set my tissue paper down just like I was pulling any other print. Again, I'm going to hit that with the hair dryer to speed up the process. Just it will dry in just a minute or two, and once that gets dried, I'm going to show you the print. I just really love this design. I think it's cool. You'll see it in my work from time to time, so I did want to include that in my video, especially since it was sort of a byproduct of the last clip with the Ransom note style lettering. Okay, for this last one, I don't really have a piece to show you, but I did include this in a video and I think it's neat. So I've got a Ziploc bag here that I cut in half, and you want to make sure that you are not doing this on the surface that has the logo on it because this will stick. So I am laying down some of my matte medium just with a brush, just want to get that good and saturated there. And what I'm doing here is creating some very translucent papers. So this is just my acid-free tissue paper once again. I put a coat down on the piece of plastic. You don't have to use a bag. You can use whatever kind of thick plastic that you happen to have laying around. A sheet of acetate should work, or anything that it's not going to stick to that you'll be able to peel this up from once it's dry. So what I do once I have that on there is I will take a credit card, an old credit card or gift card or something, and go around all of the edges just to give myself a little bit of an edge to peel up when this is dry. You'll be able to see how the paper just kind of starts to roll there with the medium on it. And it can be very difficult to get this off of here without doing this step. So I guess you don't technically have to, but if you want to save yourself a lot of grief, go ahead and do that. And then just set that aside to dry. I also had some gloss gel medium, which I hardly use for anything, but I wanted to just do a comparison for you so you could see if there was any difference, because I know a lot of you prefer to use the gloss gel to the matte, and I think it turns out very similar. I'll show you here at the end the comparison of the two. But same process, just laying a layer of it down on the bag, putting another layer on top. And what this is doing is it's making the tissue paper very translucent, almost transparent, and also it plasticizes it a little bit, so it makes it really strong compared to what you're starting with. So it's interesting when you work with it. It's almost like a thin sheet of plastic or rubber, because it's kind of feels like just, if you would peel up some acrylic paint that you had on a surface, it's the same kind of thing. So I'm just going in with my card there again and making myself a nice little edge to be able to work with once it's dry. I let this dry for a while. I did hit it with the hairdryer for a little while, but the bunched edge there that I made, that takes a little bit longer to dry. So I let that go for several hours, and I marked them so I would remember which one was which. Now, do be careful when you're peeling it up, because it is stronger than tissue paper, but it's not like, impervious to damage. So just make sure that you're careful, and you can already see when you peel that up how transparent that is. Now that shiny side is the side that was down against the bag, and the top side is the side that was facing the air. So with the matte medium, you will have one of each side. This is the gloss gel that I used here, and it's going to be glossy on both sides, but a little glossier on the side that was attached to the plastic, just because it was on such a smooth surface, so it's going to give you that shine. There's the top side, and there's the side that was touching the plastic. I think they're both very similar. I actually kind of think that the matte medium was slightly more translucent, but I'll let you decide. I'm going to put them over top of one of those striped papers here so you can really see what's going on, but you can tell even just laying on the table there how translucent they are. That's the gloss, and that's the matte, which I think is actually a little bit more see-through there, but only just a tiny bit. I think my point for doing this was that you can use either one. Use whatever you happen to have. If you want to make these, you don't have to go out and buy something specific. That's just the regular tissue paper to show you the difference between each of them side by side, and you can see how much more transparent that became. So I hope you enjoyed this process of making all of these papers with me. This is part one. Next week I'm going to be putting out part two, and in just a second here I'm going to put examples of some of the papers that will be on that video for you. Anytime you are interested in something that I make, if I haven't specifically addressed it or you want me to do a specific video on something, please just ask in the comments, and if I can accommodate, I absolutely will. But I'm always happy to share, and I'd be curious to hear if any of you use any of these techniques and what you end up making with them. Stick around to the end to see the examples that will be on next week's, but I do thank you all so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you here again next week for part two of this series. If you liked what you saw today, please hit the thumbs up button and give me a subscribe if you haven't, and a hype and all of that stuff. I really appreciate it. But here are some of the papers that I'll be doing next week. I kind of wanted to bundle these all together since they're a little bit similar with the lacy kind of wholly damaged look. I don't know what you want to call it, but they're fun to make, and these kind of papers can be really expensive to purchase, so if you can make them yourself, why not? All right, everyone, take care, and I will see you back here next Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Have a great day.